returning from the far side of the moon, it's going to be so much more complicated. And experts here have been telling us over the past week that this is a mission that they are like treading on thin ice, and no mistakes is allowed. And of course, we're looking at the Long March 5 rocket. This rocket has a successful track record. It had sent China's most complicated, most expensive, and obviously heaviest spacecraft to space. And it is ready, as professionals here have been telling us. They are well prepped for the mission. But the launch is only the first step to over 50 days of many actions. And there are some serious hoops that this mission has to jump for it to accomplish. Now, after launch, the probe has to experience a rush to the moon process. It also has to pull the brake exactly when it needed to. And you can imagine the landing on the far side of the moon is complicated. And the sample collecting, which involves both drilling and collecting sample from the moon surface, these carry their own risks. And the probe's 4 components would be separating and getting together multiple times. So there's a lot of steps, and every one of the steps has to be correctly done and in a timely manner, and done in on a deadline for the mission to be successful. So we imagine over the next over 50 days, there's going to be a lot of moments that we're going to have our hearts in our throats. But of course, it's also those moments that make this mission so much more rewarding, and everyone is anticipating that. Just now we talked to a Pakistani scientist. Now, the scientists, they've unanimously told us that the Chang'e 6 mission is a golden opportunity for science research, and that Pakistani scientists said in Pakistan, everyone is also watching the live streaming for the Chang'e 6 mission. And then we also just talked to a French scientist, and he said not only, the community has been waiting not only for the samples coming from the far side of the moon, which is something they've never had and have been anticipating for decades. But again, this mission could help solve some of the biggest questions, or lead us to the answers to the biggest questions we have about the moon, about ourselves, including can we live on the moon, and can we use the resource there. So obviously, Chang'e 6 mission is huge, it's epic, and we are going to have our eyes chained on it every step of the way. Mama.
Yeah, indeed. This will be a technically challenging mission and an epic journey, as you mentioned. Also, international payload is one highlight of the Chang'e 6 mission. You mentioned scientists from Pakistan and France, and also from other countries, are also watching closely as we wait for the moment of blastoff. Thank you so much, Chang'e, for bringing us that from Wenchang. Now, to coordinate the launch of Long March 5 rocket, part of the Chang'e 6 lunar mission, is not an easy task. CGTN's Wu Lei talks to Liao Guorui, the launch commander of the Long March 5 rocket, and brings us more on the preparations and challenges for this mission.
You have participated in over 40 space launches over the past few years, but this is your first time as a launch commander for the lunar exploration programs. How do you feel about this mission, and how does it compare to the previous ones you've been involved in?
The launch commander is the principal coordinator at the launch site, who plays the role of connecting the commanding center and the subsystems, communicating all the decisions and procedures. I need to coordinate over 20 subsystems during the launch process. Chang'e 6 is a part of China's lunar exploration project, and I'm very excited and honored to be part of the program. I have done some key analysis and been very familiar with the launch of the Long March 5 rocket.
What are some of the major challenges that you have encountered so far during this mission?
One of the challenges is that this time the Long March 5 rocket had multi-trajectories in a narrow launch window, which meant our entire team had to make plans for different rocket trajectories during the launch. We had to determine which trajectory to be used to carry out the flight mission only 25 seconds before ignition. Time is very limited, so we had to do a lot of planning and preparation for this.
The Chang'e 6 mission is the first attempt to collect samples from the far side of the moon. What do you expect to be found?
We haven't got any sample from the far side of the moon before. This is humans' first attempt to do so. I'm really excited. Human beings still have very limited knowledge of the entire universe, and we hope that through the efforts of generations after generations, we will continue to expand our understanding of unknown space.
All right, now let's hear some more analysis from my guest here in the studio, Professor Yang Yuguang from the Space Transportation Committee at the IAF. Well, Professor Yang, you've accompanied us on many occasions in China's space program. Every time you're here witnessing some great moments and sharing with us your thoughts, your expertise on the importance and the significance of the launch mission. And as mentioned by Sun Ye, the Chang'e 6 will be operating for 53 days, and the mission involves 11 phases, and every step of the way is important, is pivotal for the success of the mission. Tell us what are your expectations for this mission, and which part will be the most important or difficult?
Well, as you mentioned, I always be witness of the important moment for China's space activities, and I always recognize it is my honor to introduce our space missions to the whole world. And also, I recognize it as my duty as a technician from the China space field to have this responsibility to tell the public how important it is, how necessary it is of our space missions. As you mentioned, that's the series before in 2020 we conducted the Chang'e 5 mission. Just until now, before this Long March 6 mission, the Chang'e 5 mission is the most complicated mission in China aerospace because it has so many steps. So that at that moment, the Chang'e 6 probe is a backup of Chang'e 5, which means if anything wrong, any problem will happen to the Chang'e 5 mission. So after we have found what is wrong and we got improvement, we can in a short period, we can launch the Long March 6 and conduct the sample return from near side of the moon. But that the Chang'e 5 is a perfect mission and a complete success. So after that, the role of Chang'e 6 changed this time. So as Sun Ye mentioned, we will get samples from far side of the moon. Just 4 hours before, in Global Watch, I have already talked with your colleague Song Ning that we both have challenges and opportunities. So for the challenges, that for the Chang'e 5 mission is already the most complex mission we conducted before. But this time, although the Chang'e 6, from the view of hardware, it's quite similar to the Chang'e 5, all composed of 4 spacecraft. From the bottom to up is the orbiter, the returner, the lander, and the ascender. So 4 spacecraft. But it is more complex than the Chang'e 5 mission. That you asked which is the most dangerous or risky part. From my view of a technician, the most important or the most risky part will be the lunar orbit rendezvous, which means that the 2 spacecraft rendezvous and dock together in the circumlunar orbit. So that
extreme high velocity,
extremely important, extremely risky, and so high requirement. That many people doubt about whether the Apollo program is true or not. One thing is that that in 1960 or 1970s, it's almost
that's about half a century
unbelievable
ago.
that the human being can conduct a docking in the 6th lunar orbit. That on the lower orbit, we already have many special coverage on the docking of Shenzhou and the Tiangong space station. That's already very difficult. But that docking and rendezvous on the lunar orbit more than 380,000 kilometers from the Earth, that's more difficult. And that's because we don't have much support for the especially navigation, which means that the determination of the position and the velocity of the spacecraft. So the measure of the velocity and the position will be the first step for us to get the right operation. Now you already seen the launch pad and also our Long March 5B launch vehicle. So also, as you mentioned, the launch will be the first step. But this is only the first step. So we have more critical steps during the whole process, and each one is critical for us. Right. And if anything wrong happens to one certain step, we cannot do the others later. So this is why it is so challenging.
Now, as we're watching live feed from the launch pad in Wenchang, we could see this big rocket, the Long March 5 carrier rocket. That's China's strongest carrier rocket.
And the most powerful one.
That's right. And it's sitting there quietly at the launch pad. But then it's going to start this epic journey lasting for about 53 days. Let's talk about the rocket itself. It has a successful track record, as Sun Ye just mentioned, launching not only the Chang'e missions, but also the Wenchang module, Tianwen module, the Mars probe, as well as the core module of China's space station, the Tianhe. Are you optimistic about the launch mission this time?
Well, you know, that's the Long March 5 already, actually speaking, is a rocket family. It has two members now, the Long March 5 and Long March 5B. What you mentioned, the one launched the Wentian, Mengtian, and the Tianhe 1 core module is called Long March 5B, which is what we call a 1.5 stage rocket. So it only has one stage in its core and 4 boosters. So it is used to launch the very heavy and very huge payload to the low Earth orbit, several hundred kilometers high. But another member is called Long March 5. So it is this one is a 2.5 stage rocket. So in the core, it has 2 stages and also with 4 side boosters. So this rocket, not same as its derivative, is to launch the very high altitude payload to the outer space. So the major task will be, as you mentioned, the 2 lunar sample return missions, Chang'e 5.
龙楼讲，明白。北京文昌报告，文昌各号1小时准备完毕。 文昌到，北京请讲。文昌明白。
Still considered by many as an area that has no direct sunlight and has no line of sight
you
from
have sunlight.
the Earth. No direct sunlight at some point. The Aitken Basin, for
yes.
example, right? So let's talk about this. If we rewind the clock backwards a little bit, the Chang'e 4 mission made a successful soft landing on the far side of the moon, and the Chang'e 5 was bringing back samples from the near side of the moon. Were both missions paving the way for the Chang'e 6?
Exactly. So you can see, as we already mentioned, the Chang'e 4 mission, the probe almost have the same configuration comparing with the Chang'e 6. So we already get the experience, very, very important experience for the Chang'e 6 mission. And also, as you mentioned, the soft landing. Until today, the Chang'e 4 and its Yu-2 or the Jade Rabbit 2 rover are still the only two spacecraft working on the far side of the moon. So today we conducted another mission. Also, if it can be successful, this will be the first time we get the samples from far side of moon. You know that this have so much difficulties and challenges. First, you know that you may see my post on WeChat, the photo of the moon. But for me, because I stand on the Earth, so I can only take photos of the near side of the moon. And for the far side of the moon, you can never have that on the Earth. So also the same situation for the ground stations on the Earth. So you can see that on far side of the moon, we don't have any support from the ground stations from here because we cannot see that. So the only choice for us to utilize the data relay satellite, either use the Chang'e Magpie Bridge or the Magpie Bridge 2 data relay satellite. So this is one difficulty. Another one comes from the terrain. You see that the most relative flat regions of the moon is located in the near side of the moon.
Right.
So we call that the lunar mare. For instance, the Sea of Tranquility, the Sea of Imbrium, the Sea of the Ocean of Storms. All these lunar mares located in the near side of the moon. For the far side of the moon, you can sell them.
It's a totally different story.
Totally different terrain, totally different shape.
Unknown territory.
Yeah, some terrain are very, very steep. So it's more risky.
Professor Yang, it's a 30 minutes countdown to the launch mission.
So it is T-minus 30 minutes and counting. Or during this process, already many critical checkings and many steps were conducted. For instance, there are all kinds of subsystems on board our Long March 5 spacecraft. But you know that during the countdown, we will have the checking, examination, confirmation of all subsystems. And so, you can notice already on the big screen in the commander's room, we've already seen the right moment for the ignition.
Yeah.
Well, you can see that during the countdown, we will have all kinds of critical checkings, and each one is critical for us. And also, you may notice that, look, on the launch complex, although all the rotational platforms on the service tower has already been rotated out, you can see the whole launch vehicle. But still, you may notice there are some very small arms still connected to the launch vehicle.
Right.
So at this moment, we still have the cables, pipes, connected to the launch vehicle. You can still see the white fogs released from the tanks, the fuel tanks on the rocket. So at this moment, we can still use the pipes to pour the propellants into the tanks of the launch vehicle.
Yeah. It's pretty fascinating to think how far humanity has come from the Apollo mission in terms of lunar exploration. It's been more than half a century. And then in recent years, or in the recent decade, we are seeing countries, major players of space missions, returning back to the moon, trying to understand more about this planet. What is the purpose of that? What is driving this passion to go back to the moon?
Well, you know that generally speaking, there are two phases in the lunar exploration of human beings. The first phase comes from since actually speaking 1958 to the year 1976.
Yeah.
So on the first phase, there are only two players, the U.S. and the former Soviet Union. But you know that this is the era of what we call the moon race or the space race. So this race, in this phase, all the activities are politics driven. So they don't care how much they spend on this program. They just want to get the first, every first. So, but it's not sustainable. When they get their purpose, it cannot be continued because so great investment found in this program.
Colossally expensive.
Exactly. So they were saying that each time you launch a Saturn V lunar rocket, you exhaust a aircraft carrier. So that is the reason why it's not sustainable. But since 1990s, last century, since this comes the second tide for the lunar exploration. During this phase, all these space capable nations send their probes to the moon. But this time, it's not politics driven. It's just
scientific driven.
Exactly. So just we want to get the scientific research rewards for all of us. So this time is more reasonable and sustainable. And moreover, you see that with the probes of many countries, we already have a very, very important discovery.
Right.
The water on the lunar surface. So the water are stored in ice form, in solid form, in the permanent shadow areas, in the North
in
Pole,
all those
South
craters
Pole,
in the
craters,
South Pole,
exactly.
the Aitken
You know
Basin.
that the orbit of the moon is very unique because you know that the equator of the moon is very close to its orbital planes, which means that the different seasons, the direction of the sun does not change much. So the direction of the sun is greatly influenced by the terrain of the lunar surface and also its latitude. So in the polar regions, it's possible to have the permanent shadow areas.
Well, Professor, let's now also hear from a colleague. The Chang'e 6 will also carry equipment from other countries, and one of these is a French instrument which will seek to detect radon gas emitted by the lunar crust. So we're now joined by our colleague. Please tell us more about this equipment and what does France hope to achieve through its cooperation with China? Ross, thanks for joining us. Are you with us?
Yes, hello. France is hoping to contribute to this mission with its DORN Dawn instrument, which is going to be on board to measure radon gas, one of the odorless, colourless, noble gases. Also there, that instrument to look at the transportation of lunar dust around the surface of the moon. This is not the only China-France space cooperation mission that is happening this year. There's also the SVOM, Space Variable Objects Monitor. That is due to launch in June as well, the second China-France joint cooperation after the 2018 launch of a satellite by Paris and Beijing to measure and explore the interactions between the atmosphere and the surface. It shows that these two countries are working together when it comes to the exploration of space. That will be one of the topics on the agenda for when Presidents Xi and Macron meet here in person in Paris next week.
Ross, thank you so much for bringing us that from France. Well, Professor, going back to our last question, right now we can see from the live feed that scientists are now undergoing the second comprehensive checkup on every system of this launch mission, and we could see the light there is dimming in Wenchang, the satellite launch center, but it looks like all the weather is cooperating. We hope the weather will hold for the success of the launch.
Yeah, just several seconds before, we can see that in the panels, display panels of the flight control hall of the Wenchang spacecraft launch site, we can see that it shows that it's now conducting the second integrated checking of all systems. As I mentioned, so this checking and confirmation work is very, very important, very, very critical for the success of the whole mission, because you know that both the lunar probe and the launch vehicle is so complex. It has millions of parts. So it has all kinds of very complex subsystems. So we must conduct this checking and confirmation to ensure that every subsystem goes okay. And also, you know, that's, as I mentioned, you can see, look, there are very small arms connected to the launch vehicle. So we also have cables. And with the cables, we can have the power supply, the electricity from the service tower to the launch vehicle. So at this moment, we still don't use the energy of the storage batteries on board our launch vehicle. Only 1 or 2 minutes before the launch, we turn the power supply from the service tower to our inner side storage battery. So this is also a very critical step for the launch.
And right now we can see it's a little bit cloudy over there. Does weather have any impact on the launch mission?
Exactly. You see that, so the weather forecasting is extremely important subsystem for the launch site.
Yeah.
So you know that there are all kinds of concerns. For instance, if there are very strong wind in either high altitude or along the ground, so maybe we have to cancel the launch. Also, you know that the lightning, the thunder is also a very important consideration, because you know that the lightning will be very hazardous to our launch vehicle.
Yeah.
In some cases, we also have to postpone the launch to avoid any damage from the lightning.
Yeah.
Moreover, you see that for the launch site, you know that it's near the sea coast. So the influence of the very wet weather, such as the salty fog, will also be, you know, that's the salty fog will be also corrosive to the electronics on board our spacecraft. So we must consider the influence of these factors.
Yeah, just to minimize all the risks that could
Exactly.
pose any danger
Yes.
to our launch mission. So back to our previous question, Professor Yang, the discovery of water, of ice in the craters from the surface of the moon. It's certainly a game changer to the global ambition to return to the moon. What does it mean? Why is this discovery so important? Does it mean that we have the natural resources to not only support life, but also probably in the long term, if we are ambitious enough to support all the lunar research base on the moon, and even for us to explore further into deeper universe?
You are quite right. You see that, as I mentioned many times on CGTN, today we are in the phase transfer from the era of the lunar exploration to the era of lunar exploitation. The reason is what you mentioned, water. So water is not only drinkable for our astronauts, and not only useful to be the raw material for making propellants, but also very, very useful to be the raw material of many things. So water is extremely important for not only as you mentioned, to set up base on the lunar surface, but in the future, if we can utilize the water, the large amount of water in the South Pole regions of the moon, so it's easier for us to make the propellants and make the other things for the deeper space missions. You see that because you know that although the moon is also very big, but the gravity on the moon is only 1/6 of it compared with the Earth. So if something can be made on the moon and it can be launched into the orbit, it will be much cheaper to bring that from the Earth. So that's the key point. And with this possibility, it is possible in the future that if we want to go deeper into space, for instance, if we want to go to Mars, if we want to go to the moons of Jupiter, so for these more ambitious missions, if we can utilize, as you mentioned, the resources on the lunar surface, either the soil or the water. Look, you can extract metal, iron, titanium or other things from the soils of the moon.
Yeah, the rare earth material.
Yes, exactly. So with this material, we can make these kind of parts on the lunar surface. And because it is in the vacuum condition, and it's also easy to launch these kind of things to the orbit. And it will be, to some extent, it is possible in the future, it will be much easier to bring that from the Earth.
Sure.
And then we start from here to other celestial bodies of the solar system. So with this means we can recognize the moon as an outpost for human being to go deeper into the space.
Or a springboard for us to explore.
Exactly. So, so the moon, that is why it is not only very meaningful, very important for us to get a better understanding on scientific research, on the better understanding of the evolution of the solar system, but also from the goal of engineering, it is also very useful.
I want to get your explanation in very plain terms, Professor Yang, about the geography of the moon. For example, just to give our viewers a sense of what it looks like on the far side of the moon, even though we have limited knowledge about that part of the planet. For example, we kept mentioning about the far side of the moon. Live feed, we can see that the cable is being loosened, being detached from the launch vehicle. And from this angle, we could see clearly that it was still connected to some of the cables on the launch pad.
Yes. So we have a very reasonable and very strict sequence in which minute we do what kind of things.
Right.
Just with approaching to the moment of the liftoff, we will, as you mentioned, we will detach the pipes and cables from the body, from the fuselage of the launch vehicle, and then to go to the next step. So in this process, we will also have a good monitoring of all the parameters get from the launch vehicle. And it is very interesting that, you can see the payload fairing. The Long March, the Chang'e 6 probe is inside the payload fairing. But also, we have some window on this payload fairing, which made not from metal. So we can emit, we can have the radio wave penetrate the launch, the payload fairing. So we also have some receiver near the launch pad to get the signals from the Chang'e 6 probe directly. So we can measure whether the telemetry system is good or not.
I'd like to share with you some memory from years ago when I was covering the launch of the Chang'e 2 mission.
Yes.
It was in Xichang Satellite Launch
Exactly.
Center. And one engineer there told me, the structure of the launch pad, it looks like the umbilical cord being loosened, being detached from the launch vehicle. It's like the rocket is a baby and it's ready to go to leave the mother and to start this epic journey of its own.
Exactly. So what you mentioned is on the 1st of October 2010.
You clearly recall that day, right?
In that day, I was in Prague attending the International Astronautical Congress in Prague, in Czech Republic. That's the second mission of our Chang'e project.
Right.
So very, very impressive. So that at that moment, our Wenchang spacecraft launch center has not been coming to use. So at that moment, we don't have much other choice. We can only launch our lunar probe in what you mentioned, the Xichang Satellite Launch Center.
Right.
So in Xichang Satellite Launch Center, we have the Long March 3A series. Actually speaking, in that day, what you mentioned, we launched the Chang'e 2 probe with the Long March 3C rocket. It has a core stage and 2 side boosters. So with this rocket, we can directly launch the Chang'e 2 probe from the Earth to the translunar orbit.
Right.
So that's the first time we launch a probe directly into the translunar orbit.
Now, 15 minutes countdown to the big moment of the launch. Professor, going back to our previous question, we were talking about geography of the moon.
Yep.
Give our viewers a sense of how it looks like. We keep mentioning about the far side of the moon, and then there's also the south pole of the moon, and then there's the Aitken Basin. What is the relations of these different spots?
Well, that we mentioned about near side and the far side of the moon. So the near side of the moon occupy a half hemisphere of the moon, and the far side occupy the other. But that the total area of the moon is more than 38 million square kilometers. So it's very huge. And that what you mentioned, what we call the South Pole Aitken Basin is also very huge. The diameter is more than 1,000 kilometers, so it's a very huge area. This time, the Long March 6, the sample point will not be the South Pole, but it's in the southern hemisphere and in the middle latitude. But still, it is located inside the South Pole Aitken Basin, because the South Pole, the South Pole of the moon is in the basin. So that's the relationship between the different worlds.
And Professor Yang, let's now hear from a colleague from Pakistan. Daniel Khan is joining us live now from Islamabad. Well, Daniel, good to see you there. We know that Pakistan is sending a payload to the moon aboard Chang'e 6. Tell us more about the payload and, of course, its scientific significance.
Yes, Mong, I'm here at the Institute of Space Technology in Islamabad. I was here 3 months ago in March when students from the Shanghai University had arrived, and the significance about this satellite, it's called the iCube-Q. Q for Qamar, which is the moon in Urdu language, and it has been created in collaboration with the students from the Institute of Space Technology in Islamabad and the students from Shanghai University. They got together and met for the first time in March this year, and we covered the intensive workshops that they had, and it was quite interesting. I spoke to the students. They are very happy. This payload basically is about the weight is 7 kgs. It will be traveling on the Chang'e 6 probe, and what the professors have told me is that it is going to be orbiting the moon by itself. It's going to be laid off around 200 to 300 kilometers before the probe lands on the moon, and this satellite will be orbiting the moon, and it has 2 high-definition cameras, and it is going to be taking these pictures of the far side and the dark side of the moon, as they call it, and something that the whole world is looking for. As you can see behind me, all the local Pakistani media and the state media is here to cover this momentous event.
Sure. Well, Daniel, as you mentioned, this will be the country's maiden moon mission, the IQQ. Certainly, there's a lot of expectation and enthusiasm for it. Tell us how the local scientific community is reacting to this launch.
Yes, the scientists and the students and the faculty that have been involved in the creation of this satellite, they're very excited. I've spoken to them. They're saying that this is not the first time that Pakistan is collaborating with China, but they say that in nano satellites, this is going to be the first time that Pakistan has launched such a project. But they say that they are now looking forward to even more sophisticated technology shared by the Chinese counterparts as far as space technology is concerned. So yes, there is a lot of excitement inside this auditorium. It is full to the brim. Hundreds of students of the institute have gathered to witness this historic event.
A historic day for Pakistan. A dream of so many aspiring students to explore the unknown is about to come true.
It all started from my childhood. Basically, it looked really fascinated when I look at the moon continuously walking with us. Okay, and I usually stare at the moon from my rooftop.
The IQQ satellite, designed and developed by Pakistan's Institute of Space Technology in collaboration with China's Shanghai University and Pakistan's National Space Agency, represents a milestone in space cooperation. Made by Chinese and Pakistani students, it will be attached to Chang'e 6 mission. IQQ CubeSat will be the first nano-satellite to travel into deep space exploration. It is also the first satellite collaboration mission between Pakistan and China, as well as the universities. A symbol of mutual trust and youngsters' exploration of the moon.
At the moment of the launch of the Pakistan and the SGTU CubeSat, I'm very delighted to be part of this momentous occasion, and I can't wait to watch the launch.
In March, students from Shanghai University arrived in Pakistan to meet and train with their fellow Pakistani students. The Chinese team brought a copy of the satellite to Pakistan. It was the only time that both teams met and interacted.
Collaboration with China is really significant, and it signifies global cooperation.
Equipped with 2 optical cameras, the IQQ orbiter promises unprecedented insights into the lunar surface. IQQ has cleared rigorous testing and earned its place aboard the prestigious Chang'e 6 mission, the latest in China's acclaimed lunar exploration saga. But why does the mission matter for Pakistan?
It actually gives a big boost to our young people so that they can look forward to such projects and even more complex and bigger projects in the future.
CubeSats, renowned for their compact design and versatility, have transformed space exploration, empowering universities, research institutions, and commercial ventures to participate in cutting-edge missions at a fraction of the cost. This collaborative endeavor underscores the deepening ties between Pakistan and China in the pursuit of scientific discovery beyond Earth's bounds.
Pakistan seeks to enhance its partnership in space exploration with China Experts say this joint endeavor will not only advance Pakistan's role in space exploration, but also transition it from the CubeSats initiative to more sophisticated programs. So Mong, just minutes to go for the launch, and I will be joining the students and the faculty members who have given hours and hours of their hard work into the launch that is going to be taking place in just a few minutes.
Yeah, Daniel, sure. Well, hopefully we'll be witnessing this blast off together. Thank you, Daniel, for bringing us that from Islamabad. So certainly international cooperation is one highlight of the Chang'e 6 mission, and as we know, the moon has always been an object of wonder, a site of romance for the Chinese, and of course an interest of scientific research for people around the world, and countries are really taking this opportunity to try to deepen their understanding of this planet. We are seeing that the Chang'e 6 is carrying international payload from Pakistan, from France, from the European Space Agency, as well as from Italy. So what does it mean to have this joint efforts in the joint exploration of the moon?
Well, you know, that's for China, for a space capable like China to conduct international cooperation will be very, very important and very, very meaningful for us. You see that today China is a big country in space field. We have so much launches and so much space missions, but we are not, we view ourselves, not recognize ourselves as an advanced country in space field. To become an advanced country, we have all kinds of measures. We can have all kinds of benchmark to become an advanced country. One important thing is the international cooperation. So we think that the international cooperation is extremely important for us to become an advanced country. To achieve this goal, we not only have this kind of cooperation in manned space flight, in the applications, space applications, the Earth observations and the space science, but also in these lunar missions. You know that today it's already almost become a tradition for the space capable nations to have the payload, especially scientific research payload from other countries when they conduct a space mission.
Yeah, and this is not the first time China is
not
carrying
the first time
international
for China
payload.
and other countries. So for all these missions, they have the payload from other countries.
Live feed from the launch pad, it looks gloomier than like 10 minutes ago. Are you concerned about the weather condition?
You see, as you mentioned, the weather condition is a very, very important factor for us to consider it. But you know that whether we go for launch or not is a decision of the commander of the headquarters of the launch site. So you know that for the influence of all kinds of different factors, we have the criteria.
5 minutes to the countdown.
Yeah, T-minus 5 minutes and counting.
Right. So we mentioned earlier we have this narrow window and multi-orbits technology. Does it mean that it's the rocket could have the go-ahead to blast off in the next 50 minutes starting in 4 minutes?
Yeah, exactly. So as I mentioned, the 17:27 o'clock will be the front edge of our launch window. So this is the earliest moment we can conduct the launch. But if some small error happened or something we must handle during the process, we can stop this launch process and wait. And if the problem can be solved within 50 minutes, we still have the chance to conduct the launch today. So that's the narrow launch window, because the capability of our powerful Long March 5 rockets can provide some design margin for the launch window. So according to its capability and what we need for it, we can expand the time period permission for the launch. So this is a reason why today we can choose the narrow launch window. So it brings more chances for the launch today. So we can have the tolerance if something wrong happens.
And let's circle back to our discussion about international cooperation. We understand that the Outer Space Treaty in 1967 is considered to be the cornerstone of international space law. Over 100 countries signed up to this legally binding treaty, which details the rules governing the exploration of space, peaceful exploration
Exactly.
of space.
So as a space-capable nation, China also signed this treaty very, very early. So today, to be reasonable and to be responsible. Okay,
3 minutes countdown.
T-minus 3
and
minutes and counting.
any announcement, any command from the scientists there, the engineers there, is making us
all the ground
hold
staff
our
has
breath.
withdrawn from the launch complex.
Right.
So at this moment, as I mentioned, so there will be many critical steps. For instance, the rotation or the withdrawal of the service arms from the previously attached to the launch tower.
Right.
The cables, the pipes, you may notice that maybe at this moment the white fogs has already disappeared.
That's right.
So that means that the refueling process has already been ended.
Completed.
Yes. So it's all on its own. And during these following seconds, we will also transfer the electricity power supply from the service tower to our launch vehicle itself to use the storage batteries on board our Long March 5 launch vehicle.
Sure. Now, 2 minutes before the launch, we'd like to give our viewers a little bit more background on this mission. The Chang'e 6 spacecraft will embark on a 53-day journey to the far side of the moon and back, returning lunar soil and rocks to Earth.
Great. That's what I mentioned. The arms will turn from
Finally
from
being
the,
detached from the carrier rocket.
and all
Is that
kinds
a
of
final
cables.
sign that all systems go? The rocket is ready to go.
Yeah.
As scheduled.
As we mentioned, all kinds of cables detached from the launch vehicle. We also have
really
air conditioners in the payload fairing.
And really at this moment, I'm pretty sure that the engineers there, us and viewers watching this moment are holding their breaths.
Yes.
And again, the highlight of this mission is that the Chang'e 6 will be traveling to the far side of the moon, retrieve lunar samples, and bring them back to Earth. And if successful, this will be a history-making mission. 1 minute countdown from the launch pad in Wenchang in southern China's Hainan province.
You can see the 4 boosters.
50 seconds countdown. Well, certainly this mission will help us understand the Earth's formation, its evolution over billions of years. 30 seconds countdown.
The onboard computer is now in charge of everything.
All right. And certainly we'll bring you every detail from the launch as the rocket blasts off. Final 10 seconds countdown.
3, 2, 1. Ignition.
You're now watching live feed from Wenchang Satellite Launch Center. China's Chang'e 6 mission blasts off into the sky. It's all systems go, Professor Yang.
So magnificent. And now the tower is clear.
It's now starting its epic journey to the moon.
So at the moment, 17 seconds after liftoff will be the pitch over, change the direction.
Right.
And now you can see this is a video captured by the camera mounted on the launch vehicle. Actually speaking, on the core stage, you can see 2 of the rocket boosters.
Right. Are the cameras infrared?
This is a visible light camera.
Invisible light camera.
Yep. And you can see the flames of the boosters.
Yeah.
Each have 2 rocket engines, YF-100 rocket engines with a thrust more than 120 tons.
Sure.
And the booster will work for nearly 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Yes.
And then it will detach from
We
the
can
rocket.
hear from the ground stations. The voice comes from the reporters of the ground stations. They mentioned that the telemetry received normally and the spacecraft fly normally.
Now, as we mentioned, this mission will last for 53 days, much longer than the previous mission,
Exactly.
the Chang'e 5. It's going to make a soft landing on the far side of the moon, somewhere around the Aitken Basin. And then it's going to bring back lunar samples from the moon.
Next step will be the separation of the side boosters.
Yeah.
We have 4 boosters within several seconds.
As we were discussing, Professor Yang, how long would it take for the probe to actually land on the moon?
Well, the powered descent only lasts for several minutes, less than 10 minutes. But they will wait for this moment on the circumlunar orbit for several days.
Yeah.
So that depends on the design of the whole mission profile. Next, we will be seeing the separation of the booster soon.
Now, even the launch moment was successful. We couldn't say that this entire mission is a success because every step of the way will be pivotal for the entire mission. There's complicated procedures involved, and we're going to bring you all the details in our live coverage. What will be the moment that marks the success of the launch phase of this mission?
Yes.
Which part?
The separation of the probe with the end stage of the launch vehicle, and also that's the unfolding of the solar panels.
Solar panels.
Okay, great, beautiful.
Boosters.
Yes, all the 4 side boosters separated normally.
Applause from the control center. And that's certainly another step forward.
Yes. So the rocket will continue to work several minutes. So and the next critical step will be the separation of the payload fairing.
Right.
Because that it's in the ascending phase and its altitude is go higher and higher. So at a certain moment, we do not need the payload fairing to protect the probe.
Right. We are now a little over 4 minutes into this mission, and it looks like so far so good.
So now it's a flying of the first stage. So as I mentioned, the first stage have 2 rocket engines with liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen as a propellant.
Sure.
And each of the this is a 3D animation.
3D animation
and
back
this
to
is a
the
video
cameras
from
installed.
the camera. Yeah.
Right.
And you can see this is now today. At this moment, we can see the fuselage of the first stage. And as I mentioned, we have 2 rocket engines on the first stage of the YF-77 rocket engine. Each have a thrust more than 50 tons. And we just heard a voice. That's the ground station, the radar tracking the spacecraft very normally.
And approximately how high is it? How far away is it now from Earth? Because we can now see that beautiful view of the Earth.
Yes, actually speaking, it's already, I believe, it's already more than 50 kilometers high. And when it is high enough, as I mentioned, we will conduct the separation of the payload fairing. Oh, you can already see on the left our screen, we can see the camera inside the payload fairing. We've already seen the scene inside the payload fairing.
Right. That's, of course, giving us a very clear look, a very clear vision of the payload from inside the probe.
Yeah, inside the payload fairing. So we can see that the Chang'e 6 probe is stored in this payload fairing.
Right.
And next, okay, great,
it's
beautiful.
Opening up.
Separated. So we don't need as I mentioned, because it's already high enough, we don't need the protection of the 2 pairs of payload fairing. So it's already in outer space.
So next phase will be the second stage ignition.
First, we should separate the first stage.
First stage, right.
Yeah. Just about 8 minutes after the liftoff will be the first shutdown of the first stage. Sorry, the separation of the first stage.
Separation of the first stage followed by the second stage ignition. Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
So this is the 3D animation, and this is a video from the board on the rocket. Now you can see the beautiful Earth and the curve of the horizon of the Earth.
It really looks like, I know it is technically a demanding and challenging mission, but it's also a very romantic and beautiful journey.
Yeah, what
to
you
the
see
moon.
now is just above the Pacific Ocean.
Right. This mission is going to last for 53 days, and it consists of 11 phases. Every detail, every single action could have an effect on the entire mission.
Every step, as you mentioned, every step is important. Every step is critical. So although the thrust of the core stage, as I mentioned, of the first stage is much smaller than its four boosters, but it will work longer because the liquid hydrogen has higher energy. Great, the flight is normal according to the voice reported by the ground stations.
Right. So correct me if I'm wrong, Professor. The spacecraft consists of 4 separate components.
Exactly.
There's an orbiter, lander, ascender, and the re-entry module. And
exactly.
After launch, the Chang'e 6 will travel to the moon and enter lunar orbit, and the lander and the ascender will travel to the surface.
Yes.
While the orbiter and re-entry module stay in orbit.
The combination of the orbiter and the returner will stay in the lunar orbit to wait for the ascender.
And the ascender and the lander will touch down at the far side of the moon and collect samples to the re-entry module.
No, to the ascender. So they get the samples in the container. Okay. Great. The first stage has separated.
First stage separation.
And now will be the ignition of the second stage.
So my understanding is that the ascender will blast back into lunar orbit and transfer the sample to the re-entry module.
Look, you can see that we can see this is a camera mounted on the second stage. We can see the first stage separate and going far behind the second stage.
Another view from
this is a view of the. We can see that there is also a camera mounted near the rocket engines, so we can see the working of the rocket engines. So on the right of the screen, we can see the video camera mounted on the rear part of our second stage. So we can monitor the working of the rocket engines. This rocket engine is called YF-75D. So it is also use liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen as the propellant. It will work much longer, although the thrust is much smaller than the first stage. But it is very unique because it will ignite twice. So with the first ignition, it will burn several minutes. So at the moment, about more than 10 minutes after launch, it will shut down first. So at this moment, it will enter what we call the parking orbit. And it will float in this parking orbit for about 10 minutes, which calls this coast phase.
And once it enters orbit, before it touches down on the moon and after it goes into orbit, one very important step is to slow down the probe, just to make sure it makes a soft landing on the moon.
So you know that there are 2 steps. The first is what we call the lunar orbit insertion, which means that we slow down the vehicle from the translunar orbit to the circumlunar orbit. And then we, with what I mentioned, as you mentioned, the combination of the lander and ascender, with the combination of these 2 spacecraft, we use the propulsion system to slow down the vehicle from about 1700 meters per second to 0. Also, the altitude from about 100 kilometers to 0 within only 10 minutes. So this is also another critical step.
Fascinating. And another highlight of the mission is that there's this relay satellite.
Yes, the Magpie Bridge 2.
鹊桥 2 in Mandarin and Magpie Bridge 2 in English. So simply put, there is no direct line of sight from the Earth to the far side of the moon.
Absolutely.
And that's why we need that relay satellite to learn more about what's going on there and also receive data
Well,
from the action
as you
there?
mentioned, the Magpie Bridge 2 or the Chang'e 2 data relay satellite. But I should emphasize that Chang'e 2 is an extremely important part for our sample return mission from the far side of the moon. We cannot see the our probe, the lander on the lunar surface with our ground stations.
Sure.
And not only, that this time the Chang'e 2 or the Magpie Bridge 2 not only acts as a bridge to conduct the communication, but also it is very important for us to measure the precise position and velocity of the lander, the coordinate of the landing point, and also during the ascending phase of the ascender. You know that the basic requirement for rendezvous and docking is that we must ensure the ascender entered an orbit with the same orbital plane of the orbiter.
Sure.
So that's really important.
So does the Magpie Bridge providing data or visual images
Measure
from the far side
of the.
moon?
Okay, we can see, we hear the voice of the ground commander that the second stage has already shut down for the
Second
first
stage
time.
has already
Now
shut
the
down.
whole combination of the rocket and our probe has entered the coast phase. So it will last about 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes.
You know that for any probe to the moon, we must have or conduct the translunar orbit insertion near the equator. But although that Hainan province is the most southern province of China,
Right.
but still it's not located on the equator. So that is reason why we need a coast phase. So when the first shutdown of the second stage completed, we will have a coast phase about 10 more minutes, and then we ignite again near the equator, and then it will be the translunar orbit insertion. We can just wait.
So again, the Magpie Bridge 2, does it provide data or visual images of how the probe is there retrieving samples from the Aitken Basin?
Actually speaking, the camera mounted on the lander will monitor the whole sampling procedure. And then the signals of these videos will transfer first to our Magpie Bridge 2 data relay satellite, and then forward it to the Earth.
Is there a time delay, I would imagine?
The time delay is only 1 more second. You can
a little
ignite
more than
that.
a second.
Yeah, because that it's too far from the Earth. The distance is more than 380,000 kilometers away.
What if the command center gives some orders to the probe? Does the Magpie Bridge 2 also do the job?
Exactly. So we cannot directly send the command to the probe, to the lander directly. We can only to first send the command to the Magpie Bridge 2 and then forward that to the lander. So now we can still, that at this moment, we still have the communication with the spacecraft with the help of our Tianlian data relay satellite. So you can see we can still send the video captured by the camera mounted on the second stage.
Yeah.
So this is a 3D animation, but it is based on the real data we get from the parameters measured by the sensors on board our spacecraft. So it's just fly above the Pacific Ocean.
Right.
So when it reaches the equator, it will ignite again.
Yeah. Before we get to the technical details of this mission, Professor Yang, let's talk about the different types of landing or different types of lunar exploration.
Yep.
Because there are the flybys, there's the hard landings, and then there's the soft landing. I remember there's one more type. Which part is the most technically challenging?
Absolutely, the sample return will be the most challenging one, like this one. As we discussed before, China has already conducted 3 phases of the lunar exploration program in 3 very simple Chinese words. 绕, 落, 回.
Right.
绕 means orbiting in English. And that we conducted it by the Chang'e 1 probe and the Chang'e 2. And 落 means landing. Landing conducted by the Chang'e 3 and the Chang'e 4. And 回 means sample return. So we conducted with Chang'e 5. So you see, for each one step, we also need to do the things on the previous step. For instance, if you want to conduct a landing, you must have the orbiting. And for the sample return, you must first have the orbiting and then the landing.
Yeah, it's always a follow-up mission of the previous one.
So we master the key technologies one by one.
So China's lunar exploration mission, what is the final aim of this entire mission?
Well, you know that today we are already in the fourth phase of our lunar exploration program. So for this program, we will set up or build a permanent base on the lunar surface called the International Lunar Research Station. So it is an international cooperation with other countries. So today already have many countries involved in this program. And you know that's in the fourth phase of our lunar exploration, we only have the Chang'e 7 and the Chang'e 8 probes landed in the South Pole regions of the Moon. So they will form the most essential or the basic configuration of our research station. So we can see that in the commanding or flight control hall of the Wenchang Space Launch Site, we can see the time of the total flight duration. Exactly. So this time, we also can see from this 3D animation, which is driven by the real data, we can see the real attitude and also the position of our combination of the Chang'e 6 probe and the second stage of the Long March 5.
Yeah, and of course these scientific data are crucial for ground control command to monitor the status of this spacecraft.
So as I mentioned, the spacecraft need to fly from Wenchang Space Launch Center, spacecraft launch site to the equator. So it do need several minutes.
Sure. So again, our plan to build a lunar research base.
Exactly.
Would it be on the far side of the moon?
It still depends on which is the final chosen position. But absolutely, it will near the South Pole, whether it will on the near side or on the far side of the moon. But still, you know that we've already talked about the Chang'e 2 data relay satellite. It is very interesting that the Chang'e 2 chose a quite different orbit comparing with its successor, the Chang'e 1. So you know that the Chang'e 1 located in what we call the halo orbit, very close to the what we call the Earth-Moon L2 point, which is far from the moon, about actually speaking about 70,000 kilometers above the moon. But this time we choose a high elliptical orbit circle around the moon for this Chang'e 2 because with this design, the orbit will be much closer to the lander, so it can get more high-rate communication for its lander.
And again, this is the time. This is the time of the flight duration.
Yes. So the next critical step will be the reignition of the second stage.
Reignition of the second stage.
Also named as the translunar orbit insertion. So at this moment, the combination of the spacecraft are in what we call a parking orbit.
Parking orbit.
Parking orbit. So the altitude of this orbit is usually only about 170 kilometers to about 200 kilometers in altitude. So it's not very high from the Earth, but still it is outside the atmosphere. So it is possible we fly in this orbit in a very short period, for instance, this time in about 10 minutes, to fly to the equator.
You mentioned just now the long-term goal of China's lunar exploration program is to build the scientific research base on the moon's surface. But it couldn't stop just there because China has a bigger goal of sending people, astronauts, onto the moon by 2030.
Yes, so we both have robotic missions and manned missions to the moon. So each mission are very important and very necessary for Earth. For the robotic missions, you have more choices because the budget is much lower than the manned missions. For instance, for lunar probe sending return mission, we only use the Long March 5 mission, Long March 5 probe, Long March 5 rocket, which can send about more than 8 tons of payload to the moon. But for a manned mission, we at least need the capability more than 40 tons. You can see how the difference is. And you see that, so each one is necessary. For the robotic missions, you can have wider choice of in which point you get the samples and in which point you conduct the research. But for the manned missions, you know that we can brought our experts to the moon. For instance, during the Apollo 17 missions, a scientist, Mr. Harrison Schmitt, were brought to the moon. You know that he's a scientist and he conducted all kinds of very complex operations on the lunar surface. So this is very meaningful and very necessary.
But of course, he must have undergone intense training in order to become an astronaut.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So this race back to the moon is going on in different countries.
I don't recognize it as a race. You see that China developed our space technology, conduct our lunar program, not only the robotic program or the manned lunar program, according to our needs to promote our high technology. To have the space technology, to develop these technologies, benefit our daily life, benefit our progress of the society. So we don't have the risk of with other countries. Whether the other country will be earlier than us or behind us, we don't care about that.
Yeah, China has always maintained its position that the exploration of space is peaceful and the benefits should be shared by all of humanity.
Exactly. And you see that for the human being, the moon has other very important meanings. You know that today the energy is a great problem for the human being, for the sustainable development for the human being in the future. But you see there are helium-3, very sufficient helium-3 resources on the lunar surface. Although today it is still too early to talk about collecting the helium-3 at this
for the
stage.
Earth's benefit, but the resources, the reserves there could power Earth for centuries.
Maybe next century, maybe later. So if in the future, theoretically speaking, it is possible for Earth to master the technology of controlled fusion power. If we can get or master the technology of controlled fusion power, it will be the completely green energy resources for the human being. And you know that, as you mentioned, the helium-3 on the lunar surface can be used for thousands of years for human beings. So that is the reason why the lunar exploration is so meaningful today.
And that could certainly help address the climate and energy crises that we are facing today on Earth.
But I still should emphasize that's still too early to talk about this now.
It's a blueprint. It's a long-term goal.
Exactly. It's a vision.
Yeah, it's a vision.
So about 5 minutes left for the second ignition of the second stage. So we will conduct the lunar orbit insertion very soon. So you may notice at this coaster phase, we also have the control. You can see that although it is not a real video stream, but the 3D animation, as I mentioned, is driven by the real data, by the real parameters. So you can see that the attitude or the direction of the combination of the spacecraft is still very, very stable because we have the attitude control engines on board our second stage of the Long March 5.
Sure. We're now about 24 minutes into this mission, the Chang'e 6. This is a milestone mission as it will mark the first time that a spacecraft will make a landing, hopefully, a soft landing on the far side of the moon and bring samples back.
We have a measure to adjust the duration of the coaster phase to have different choices of the launch window. So this is also a key technology we've already mastered several years before. And with this help, we can extend the launch window. And as I mentioned, you know, as we've already discussed, you may remember just now, we already discussed the influence of the weather. There are all kinds of things that can influence the possibility of a launch. So to extend the launch window, we must master this technology.
Right. So for humanity to further explore the moon, it's not only for us to get a better understanding of the planet, but also for us to go deeper into the universe. For example, maybe perhaps one day in the future, the moon could be used as a launch pad.
Yes, quite right.
For our journey to Mars.
Yes, and according to the analysis of many experts, it will be cheaper. You know that although I don't agree that we human being today we should colonizing Mars. Until now, the human being has not mastered the necessary technologies to colonizing Mars. But I always support that the human being now, we should set up a permanent base on the Martian surface. It is very meaningful and also very important for us. You know that for this goal, you know, the most difficult thing or the most tough point for us is to have a sustainable or a low-cost transportation system between the Earth and Mars. And during this process, I think there are two things we should consider. The first one is the on-site resource utilization, either on the Martian surface or on the Earth. On the moon.
On the moon.
Yeah. So if we can utilize great, we can see the scene in the.
They all look very
the flight
relieved,
control center.
relaxed, and that's certainly a good sign for the mission, meaning the most
So
risky
now we are very
part.
close to the second ignition.
Right. You do have a long-term vision, Professor Yang. You were talking before we were able to understand the far side of the moon and build up a space there. You were thinking about building a camp, building a research base on Mars.
Yes, like that we done in Antarctica region. So you know that today China already have more than maybe 4 or 5 stations in the Antarctic region, in the continent. But you know that it is also necessary for us to do the same thing on Mars. But to do this, you know that the cost of the transportation between the Earth and Mars is extremely expensive now. So what we should do now is to conduct all kinds of technical measures to reduce the cost greatly, remarkably, for this purpose. So the first step, maybe just what SpaceX have already done, we should also master the technology of reusable launch vehicle. And in the future, you know that today we already have many state-owned companies, and the private companies in China is now developing this technology.
Scientists and engineers at the Ground Control Center are looking relaxed than prior to
They
the
are
launch.
also, I believe, they are also waiting for the ignition, the reignition.
Yeah. As we said, every minor step of the way is pivotal for the success of the entire mission.
Yep. As I mentioned, the coaster phase will last for more than 10 minutes, quite long procedure.
Second stage ignition, the second
Reignition.
type. Reignition.
Okay, great. We heard the voice.
Another round of applause from the engineers.
Yeah.
on
So
Earth.
the second ignition, the second burn will last for several minutes.
Second stage boosts for second time.
So this is also called the lunar orbit insertion. You know that the parking orbit, the velocity is about 7.8 kilometers per second. But if you want to go to the moon, the velocity must reach to about 11 kilometers per second. So there is a great gap between these two velocities. So that is reason why we need the second ignition, just near the equator. So we utilize the second stage to conduct the second burn to have the translunar orbit insertion.
It's pretty fascinating to think that what's keeping scientists, engineers, and amateurs alike, keeping their passions is the uncertainty and the unknown of the vast reaches of the universe. There's just so much to explore.
Well, you know that the curiosity, I believe it is human nature for not only our engineers and scientists, but for all human beings. And also, I should emphasize that to study, to explore the universe is also even very, very important for us to know the destiny of human being. You know that why we conducted so much missions to study the history or evolution of the moon, because with only in this measure we can have a more precise prediction of the fate of human being in the future. So you know that after maybe 5 billion years, the sun will become a red giant, and at that moment the Earth is not habitable for human being. So we must know or have a better understanding, a better prediction of what will happen in the future.
Nothing is impossible. And just think about hundreds of years ago when scientist Galileo Galilei invented the space
astronomical telescope,
and we were able to have the first sight of the moon.
Especially the
side of
craters on the moon.
Craters on the moon.
Yeah.
And now the Chang'e 6 mission is bringing with it a payload from Italy, from scientists there. It really tells us how much humanity has, made leaps forward in our exploration, our passion, and our renewed interest in the moon.
As mentioned by our guest from Pakistan, so their CubeSat will have a very powerful function to take photos on the lunar orbit.
Yeah.
So I believe that it is very beautiful, that's the photos of moon, and also very, very helpful for us. Although, it is important for us to enjoy the far side, the sightseeing on the far side of the moon. But with the orbiters, we can do this. And even today, for instance, the US has a probe called the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. It can even take the pictures of the trail of the rovers on the lunar surface.
So thinking about the long-term goal, Professor Yang, I still want to mention the crewed missions to the moon, because we understand that now we are working towards that goal by 2030, and the US has its Artemis program going on at the same time.
Yes, Miss Wang Yaping, the first space teacher of China, also the first female to enter the China space station, are friends of we both. And she has expressed many times to major media of China, she hopes to walk on the moon in the future. So first, I press my best wish to her to fulfill this dream. And also, I should emphasize, this is another millennium dream for we Chinese. Yang Liwei has already fulfilled the first millennium dream of the Chinese people, and I believe that walking on the moon will be the second one.
Yeah.
So in the future, as you mentioned, we will have the plan to be scheduled before 2030, before the end of 2030, to have our first crewed mission to the lunar surface. But still, we must face, honestly speaking, many challenges during this process. First, we must have a more powerful launch vehicle, even much more powerful than this Long March 5 rocket.
Right. Earlier on, you mentioned the heavier payload for a crewed mission to the moon. Why is it so much heavier than an unmanned mission? Is it because it has to bring with it the life-supporting materials like water, food, for example, to really keep our astronauts alive and functioning well on the moon?
You know that we can have a comparison between the Shenzhou spaceship and the future manned spaceship to the moon. You see that the total mass of our Shenzhou spaceship is more than 8 tons. But you know the difference between Shenzhou spaceship and the spaceship to the moon is that for the spaceship to the moon, it must have much greater capability to change its velocity comparing with the Shenzhou spaceships. So that is the reason why our Mengzhou, the next generation spaceship, if it goes to the moon, it will have a very huge fuel tank and have so much propellant. You know that the moon is a big celestial body, although it is much smaller than the moon, than the Earth. So when approaching the moon, we must deaccelerate or brake to conduct the lunar orbit insertion. And also, we need to go back to the Earth. All these procedures need a lot of propellant. So that is the reason why the Mengzhou spaceship is more than 26 tons. So you can see it's even only not include the lander, even the spaceship itself is 3 times heavier than our Chang'e 6 probe. So that is reason why we need another much more powerful rocket, actually speaking a Long March 10 for this process.
It's heavier because it requires much more fuel to power the mission.
Yeah. So still the second stage is burning. After it is burned off, the probe, the combination of the second stage and our Chang'e 6 will enter the translunar orbit.
Right.
Great. So it's already shut down, as I mentioned.
Already shut down.
Yeah. So the next critical step will be the separation between the rocket and the probe.
All right. And after that, we'll be awaiting the solar panel to open up.
Yeah. So this is viewed by the camera mounted on the second stage.
Well, Professor Yang, I know you are really a professional photographer as well, taking pictures of the moon. What do you fantasize when you look at the moon from Earth?
Well, you know that with the telescope, we can get more details of the lunar surface. I enjoy this, and also many of my foreign friends like it and endorse me on the social media. And also, you know that for system designer on spacecraft, we must be very familiar with the optical systems. So this is how I can master the necessary skills for the for study the optical systems. So we can see that on the right, top right is a 3D animation based, as I mentioned, driven by the real data. So still at this moment, we can see the dashed lines is the communication links between the ground station. Okay, beautiful.
And that was the separation
so
of
now
the rocket
you can see the video is the rear part of the Chang'e 6. Actually speaking, is the orbiter. So we can see the cylindrical part of the probe is the biggest part is the orbiter.
So this certainly marks another important step in this mission. That's the separation of the rocket.
Yes.
And
so this is also another critical step, and then will be the unfolding of the solar panels. Both on the orbiter and on the lander, because they will fly independently several days later. So we need the unfolding of the two pairs of solar panels.
And until these two sets of solar panels are opened up, that will mark the success of the launch mission.
Exactly. Moreover, we should also evaluate the accuracy of its initial orbit, because you know that only it is accurate enough we can have the possibility to conduct the successive procedures.
And I also want to talk about China's space station, the Tiangong. What kind of international cooperation is being showcased on the CSS?
I believe that our Tiangong space station is a very ideal place to conduct the international cooperation. So today we already have the joint experiments with other countries. And next step, we've already talked many times, will be the visiting of the foreign astronaut to our Tiangong space station. So
you know what, Professor Yang, when I see the scientists, engineers taking out their glasses, it means that they are really relieved to see how well the mission is progressing.
Yes, quite right.
And finally, some smiles from these scientists there.
Okay, we just heard his voice that, as I mentioned, the orbital parameters has already been acquired. So, as I mentioned, the accuracy of the orbital parameters is also very critical for our mission.
Sure. Has the spacecraft established communications with the Magpie Bridge 2 at this moment?
No. At this moment, it's still too far from the Magpie Bridge 2. So at this moment, it still has the communication link between the Tianlian data relay satellite with space tracking ships, such as Wenchang series tracking ships on the Pacific Ocean. They are already in SMILE, so that means that the most risky part has already passed for the launch.
And they start talking and having some small chat over there.
Yeah.
It's a rewarding moment for the scientists.
Yeah. So I believe that we can see the big red screen soon.
Yeah.
It's our tradition.
Yeah, it is. It really is something that we're all looking forward to.
Yeah. Now you can see it's already more than half an hour now. So that is a very important feature for the launch of the Long March 5 or the Long March 3A series. Because it needs a coaster phase that lasts very long.
And now let's hear some more insights from Mark McCorin, former senior advisor for science and exploration at the European Space Agency in the Netherlands. Thank you so much for joining us on our program. Now, as we are both watching for, as we're both waiting for that big moment, the announcement of the success of the launch mission, what aspects of Chang'e 6 lunar mission are you most looking forward to?
well, as a scientist, it's an amazing thing to be able to go to the far side of the moon and bring samples back. It's very different from the near side of the moon, the piece of the moon we see all the time because of the way the moon is locked to the rotation of the Earth. It also will hopefully bring us some idea about the way that the moon was struck by these very large impactors, by asteroids, early in the solar system history, billions of years ago. Was that something that happened very quickly in one big bunch of impacts, or was that something that happened slowly? And by returning samples from that particular location, the South Pole Aitken Basin, we should actually be able to learn much more about the history of our solar system that way. So that's really exciting. But let me also say, congratulations, of course, to getting to this point now. Half an hour into the mission, it seems to be going extremely well.
And as you mentioned, it really is a very important mission for us to understand the formation, the evolution of the moon over a span of billions of years. And China, as we know, is also carrying international payload in this mission. It's been advocating international cooperation in space for a long time. What do you make of the cooperation between China and Europe, Mark?
Well, I think it's a good thing. I've been talking to some of my colleagues this morning, ESA colleagues who are out there in China at the launch, and hopefully I'll chat to them a little bit later on, and hopefully they will have seen that very, very beautifully as we did on the live stream. But bringing those instruments on board to do science, of course, is the main goal of this kind of cooperation, is to share the scientific knowledge. And this is something where, of course, we collaborate internationally. We collaborate with the United States, we collaborate with Russia, we collaborate with Japan, and we collaborate with China. We also have a mission which should be launched in the next year or so called SMILE, which is a collaboration between China and ESA, where that mission will be investigating the magnetic field of the Earth. And that's an important aspect which is linked to so-called space weather, where the impact of the sun on the Earth's atmosphere is something we want to study in more detail. So we just saw the launch contract for that was signed last week. That will be a European launcher with a European Chinese payload. And what we just saw today is European parts on a Chinese-led mission to the moon. So I think that this scientific collaboration is, of course, very important. We should always keep in mind that space is a very political environment, of course, and there are all sorts of geopolitical issues in the background here. But as a scientist, I'm very happy to see this collaboration go forward.
Mark, let me also ask you this. I could see Chinese calligraphy hanging on the wall, and I'm pretty sure that you're familiar with the Chinese culture as well. And you must also know that the Chang'e is named after this legendary Chinese moon goddess. Do you also share this dream of lunar exploration, this passion, and of course renewed ambition to explore the moon?
I think it's something, of course, that's fascinated me throughout my life. I'm old enough that I was around when the Apollo missions went to the moon, and I've worked with many of the Apollo astronauts. I've been on tour with Buzz Aldrin, for example, who was on that very first mission with Neil Armstrong to the surface of the moon. And to see that come back now in recent years, of course, there is an element partly, again, of this geopolitical aspect, whereas it was the Soviet Union and the United States before. Now you have a much broader array of players in this game. And there's also this question about this exploitation that your guest there spoke about a bit earlier on, which was that exploration is driving the science, but the possibility of looking at the moon as a resource is another thing. I'm a little bit skeptical about making it a fully commercial thing. I'm not sure how that would work. And we do need to think about how we protect the resources as well, that it shouldn't be a free-for-all, that everybody can go and just get rich. The same applies to Mars. We don't know if there's life on Mars yet. Should we be going there with human beings until we've investigated it properly scientifically? So I think it's a very interesting time. I mean, if I'm right, as you said, the calligraphy behind me is the constellation of Orion, Li Hu Zhuo, if I remember correctly from one of my trips to China. And so I am also very interested in looking well beyond our own solar system. So I've studied the constellation of Orion for many years in my career. And those dreams are definitely real. And that inspiration that space can bring, and then the collaboration that also encourages, I think is something we need to reflect back to Earth, collaborating to solve some of the challenges that were addressed earlier in your program, for example, nuclear fusion and how we solve the energy crisis. That we're only going to survive on this planet by international collaboration, and we're not going to go and live on other planets very soon. So I think that's the important strand here, international collaboration for helping this planet. And lunar exploration is an exemplar for that.
Of course, we are seeing competition at different degree, but it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, the discovery, the learning of the moon is certainly bringing benefits to all of humanity. Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing with us your insights. Well, the Chang'e 6 will carry equipment from France, Sweden, Italy, and Pakistan. It's part of China's international cooperation in space. A French instrument mounted on the lander will study the origin and dynamics of the lunar exosphere. CGTN's Natalie Carney talked to Pierre-Yves Meslin, a planetary scientist whose team invented the instrument.
For years, planetary scientist Pierre-Yves has been working on instruments destined for Mars. But the launch of China's Chang'e 6 spacecraft now puts him at the cutting edge of moon exploration. His invention, the detection of outgassing radon, or DORN, is set to become the first ever French instrument to be deployed to the surface of the moon.
The objective of the DORN experiment is to study both the origin and the dynamics of the lunar atmosphere, but also to study the physical and thermal properties of the lunar soil where those gases are produced.
To do this, DORN will measure the radioactive gas radon, which is produced in lunar rocks and, when emitted, migrates to colder areas of the lunar environment.
If we understand better the migration of radon, we will be able to better understand also the migration of other volatile species, like, for instance, water, that can migrate to the cold polar regions and then form ices. That is a prime interest for the future Chang'e 7, Chang'e 8 missions or missions from other international agencies.
Romain Maton is the mechanical architect of the DORN.
So here we have the 8 detectors which are shining. The radon is going to be captured by the detectors, 2 detectors forming a telescope. The front one will see the alpha particles coming from the radon, and the other one will be here to discriminate any other events which will be seen by the instrument.
The project team says time was the biggest challenge when it came to the DORN's development.
The project started early 2020, so it was right before COVID time, and we delivered last summer. So overall it was 3.5 years of development, which is something that is super short for us. So having an instrument that we develop and that is going to the far side of the moon, it's really exciting for us. We are going to be part of a mission that has a really technological fate. So it's a great honor to be part of it.
More than 20 French engineers worked closely with Chinese colleagues at China's Institute of Geology and Geophysics and the Chinese University of Geoscience in Beijing to make the project happen.
This is the first time that France and China are collaborating in the field of solar system exploration. First, they helped us interacting with the engineers from the spacecraft team at CAST. They also helped us negotiate the spacecraft resources that we needed for our instrument. And they also helped us a lot after we delivered the instrument to China last August. They helped us mount the instrument onto the spacecraft. I think we have established a relationship of trust and also friendship between the two sides.
Pierre-Yves is now in China for the launch of the spacecraft and will stay there for a month to monitor the DORN during its time on the far side of the moon. He'll collect its data and continue harnessing the benefits of international collaboration in discovering the wide, vast unknowns of outer space. Natalie Carney for CGTN, Toulouse, France.
Well, international cooperation is certainly a highlight of this mission, and our colleague Mark, right there, he was talking about turning this idea from exploration of the moon to exploitation of the moon. And you rightly pointed out that really we are facing this first mover advantage. For example, whoever gets there first will have a say on how to explore the moon and maybe perhaps making rules for the exploration of the planet?
Well, you know that to have a smooth cooperation with other countries, we do respect the considerations of other countries. For instance, you know that the landing site of the Apollo missions are the legacy not only of the United States, but recognize it as the legacy of all human beings. So we will protect that. Of course, we will do not land in the landing site of Tranquility Base, because we have the footprint of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin there. So we should protect that. It is a history of the human being, not only the United States. So we will protect that. But you know that the moon, the resources are the resources of all human beings. So it is the right moment, because you know that the transportation between the Earth and the moon is already very practical. So it is the right moment for Earth to utilize the resources of the moon. So to this extent, it is the exploitation of the moon.
Right, and we are now almost 50 minutes into this mission, a little over than 50 minutes into the mission.
So the next important step, you know that at this moment is the Chang'e probe is orbiting the Earth in a shadow area.
Right.
So when it meets the sunshine, it will unfolding its solar panels. You know that we've already mentioned it is a very complex mission. It has 3 pairs of solar panels.
Located on the
orbiter, the returner,
lander.
and the lander.
Right,
yes,
and the
exactly.
returner as well.
So, but before the, just in this stage, we will unfold 2 pairs of them. The solar panels on board the orbiter and the one in the lander. Yes. Because this moment, they are a combination of 4 spacecrafts, but when it already entered the circumlunar orbit, it will separate
into
and
2
become
parts.
Independent parts.
Right. The sender and the lander will be in one part, and the returner and the orbiter
will be the other part. So
right.
The one combination becomes 2 combinations. The unfolding of solar panels means that we can get a continuous power supply from the sun.
Right. And during these 53 days of the Chang'e 6 mission, our scientists on Earth, on the ground, will also be keeping precise communication with our probe.
Actually speaking, when it is in the lunar orbit, we can utilize our ground stations. But when it is on the surface of the far side of the moon, we can only depend on our Chang'e data relay satellites. And you see that, as you mentioned, you know that in the 4th phase of our lunar exploration program, actually speaking, in the Chang'e 8 mission, we will demonstrate the right technologies to utilize the resources on the lunar surface. So the on-site resource utilization is already on its way. So we are preparing for the exploration of the lunar resources.
And as we mentioned just now, Professor Yang, the sampling procedure will involve 2 parts. One is drilling, and the other part is scooping. The solar panels are being unfolded on the orbiter. That's right, and that is...
So this is the first step. This is shown by the, as I mentioned, the real telemetry data received from the vehicle itself. So although it's only a 3D animation, but it can represent the real status of the spacecraft.
Now, can we say at this stage that the probe, the spacecraft, will be on its own?
Actually speaking, it's already on its own during the separation between the rocket and itself. But still, you know that at that moment, because it's in the shadow area of the Earth, so it can only use the electricity in the storage batteries inside the probe.
Right.
So at this moment, with the unfolding of the solar panels, it can have, as I mentioned, a continuous power supply with solar energy.
What is the difference of the lunar soil retrieved from drilling and the scooping procedures?
Yes, good question. You know that when we get the samples by drilling, we can have a better understanding of the evolution of the moon, because many information were under the ground, under the surface of the moon. So if we can get more deeper under the surface, this can get many information. And for those on the surface, you know that for billions of years, for more than 4 billion of years, the influence of the sun and the surrounding environment also is very important for us to study. So you know that the regolith, the rock on the surface of the moon, already lie there for billions of years. So with the, as you mentioned, the scooping of the samples, we can also have the information in this area.
So on the near side of the moon, because there is direct sunlight, and then perhaps after billions of years of exposure under the sunlight, the objects or the materials for us to understand the formation of the moon has shifted or has become different than that from the far side of the moon.
As I mentioned, you know that the direction of the sunlight depends on one thing is the latitude. The other one is you know that if you are in a low latitude on the moon, the lunar night lasts for 14 days comparing with the Earth, and also the same as the daytime on the moon. But for the position near the South Pole, it will be different. For these reasons, there are some places in the permanent shadow. And for other places, maybe they have a very long-term sunshine. So that is the reason in the long-term sunshine area, it's easy to get continuous not only the power supply, but also you know that in the lunar light, for instance, in low latitude regions, the temperature can be below 250 degrees Celsius below zero.
Wow.
How cold it is, you can imagine. So the spacecraft cannot survive in the extremely cold night. So it is easier if you have a longer sunshine period. Right. So that is the reason, as I mentioned, why the South Pole is so important for human beings. So the thermal control is a challenging factor for us.
Yeah. So all these craters that we see on the moon's surface are a result of massive objects pelting over billions of years. How deep are these craters?
You know that there are very small craters, maybe created every day on the lunar surface, but still at this moment it's still been impacted by the small asteroids. But you know that during the history, according to the study of astronomers, there must have very huge asteroids impact on the moon. So the largest crater, you can even see that the diameter hundreds of kilometers wide. Wow. So that is the reason, as we've already discussed, the South Pole Aitken Basin. So it is the largest crater on far side of the moon. As I mentioned, the diameter is more than 1,000 kilometers, very huge. And also, you know that one interesting thing is that these kind of giant impact in the history may bring some material inside the moon to the surface. Also,
mantle
or even in the core to the surface. So it is possible for us, if we are lucky enough, we can also get some material. Maybe it is no chance for you to dig that.
There were signs and evidence of volcanic activities on the moon.
Volcanic activities last for billions of years. So we've already get the very helpful samples during our Chang'e 5 mission to have a better understanding of the history, much younger than the samples collected by other probes from other countries. You see that the Ramco mountain, or the Mount Ramco in the Ocean of Storms, which is the landing site of the Chang'e 5, is much younger than other places on the moon. So that is the reason why it is helpful for us to complete the whole history of the moon.
The lunar sample that our probe, the Chang'e 5 retrieved from the near side of the moon, is being exhibited to
yes, in the National Museum.
At the National Museum for the public to see.
Yes.
What have scientists done with the lunar soil in terms of studying the formation and, of course, the evolution of the moon?
Actually speaking, you know that we already have released different batches of this sample. One important thing, or very important, interesting thing, is that some of the scientists need to return the samples back, because you know that there are two generally speaking, there are two categories of study. One will exhaust we will lose the sample after study. But with some other measures, we can have no any loss. So with these measures, after study, the scientists need to return the samples back to the China Academy of Science. So this is very interesting. And you know that for Earth, we already find some material that never exists on the Earth.
Right.
So it is known as the Chang'e stone. So this is maybe the third material discovered.
Right, and as the Chang'e 6 mission aims to sample retrieve from the far side of the moon, the probe will go through many stages before it brings home precious lunar soil.
The Chang'e 6 mission has some 11 flight stages. First, it is launched into orbit by the Long March 5 carrier rocket. Then it enters a rush to the moon process. When nearing the moon, it will pull the brake and enter the lunar orbit. That's called perilune braking process. Then the probe files in the lunar orbit. The lander and the ascender form a combination, and the orbiter and returner form another combination. The landing-ascending combination will touch down on the far side of the moon to carry out lunar sampling task, while the orbit-return combination will continue to fly. The sampling on the far side of the moon includes both drilling and surface sampling methods, and scientific exploration on the far side of the moon will also be carried out. After the sampling is completed, the ascender carrying the collected lunar soil will take off from the far side of the moon to dock with the orbit return combination. The moon samples will be handed over to the returner. When the orbit return combination comes near the Earth, the returning capsule will separate. In a hopping move, the returner will re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and land in Siziwangqi, Inner Mongolia.
So let's give a review of China's lunar exploration program, Professor Yang. From 2007 to 2020, we've seen the evolution from Chang'e 1 to Chang'e 5. What are some of the experiences or lessons learned from these missions?
Well, let's digress them one by one.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, we have already accomplished the 3 phases of our lunar exploration program. So the first stage, we will master the technology of orbiting the moon. So with Chang'e 1 probe launched in 2007, we mastered this technology. But it is very interesting. You know that at that moment, we don't have much experience on this. So we choose a very interesting trajectory that do not directly go to the moon. So the Long March 3A rocket only launched the Chang'e 1 probe to the geosynchronous transfer orbit, which already have much great experience on this. And then with the engines on board the Chang'e 1 probe, reading its apogee, finally it goes to the moon. And then we have the very successful lunar orbit insertion and become an orbiter of the moon. And we take so much pictures, and the first time we got the 3D images of the whole moon. First time.
Sure.
And then after the mission, the Chang'e 1 probe controlled an impact on the sea of fertility on the lunar surface. So this is the first spacecraft object of China to reach another celestial body. And then, you know that in 2010, as you mentioned during the live coverage, at that moment I was in Prague, and we conducted the second mission. And it is a preparation for the landing mission, because you know that during this mission, we choose a direct transfer by the Long March 3C rocket, powerful than the Long March 3A, and directly send our Chang'e 2 probe to the translunar orbit. And then it choose a much lower orbit than the first one. And it also demonstrates the necessary technologies to lower down to the Rainbow Bay to preparation for the landing mission. And also, after the major task, the Chang'e 2 leave the circumlunar orbit and go to 1.5 million away from the Earth, called the Sun-Earth Libration Point 2. And then go deeper into the solar system and taking pictures of the Tortoise asteroid. Very, very interesting. And in 2013, we conducted the Chang'e 3 soft landing mission in the Mare Imbrium, or the Sea of Rain, near the Rainbow Bay area. So this is the first soft landing of China. And several years after that, maybe in 2018 or 2019, we conducted the Chang'e 4 mission. And just before that, we also have two very important missions. One is the launch of the Magpie Bridge 1, or the Qiao data relay sat. Another one is what we called, we also, I remember that we have an interview here. It's called the Long March 5 T1 flight test, which is to test the technology necessary for the returner to go back to the Earth with a much higher speed, more than 11 kilometers per second. So this is also a preparation for the Long March 5 mission. And then in 2020, we launched the Long March 5 and the Chang'e 5 probe to get the sample back from the Mount Ramker region. And this is the first sample return mission. And then today, we have the sample return mission from the far side of the moon.
So earlier, we talked about the different types of lunar explorations. There's the flyby, the hard landing, and the soft landing. Of course, soft landing involves more precision, greater precision, and more control, and of course, more risks.
Yes, exactly. You know that just within these years, we have been seeing that so much failures during the landing attempt, either by Israel, by India, and by other countries. You see, that is the reason why it is so difficult. You know that landing on a big celestial body like the moon, you must deaccelerate your very high speed to zero within a very short several minutes, and also decrease your altitude to the zero within several minutes. So anything wrong happened to your any of your subsystems, such as the wrong measure of your position and velocity, the wrong or the error in your measure of your attitude, your direction, and also other error in your measurement, and also the error in your control. All these things can cause the failure of your mission. So that is the reason why today only a few countries can conduct a soft landing on the lunar surface. Moreover, you know that just several months before, the United States also suffered a failure in the Peregrine mission because there is a leakage of the probe. And also, you know that during the SLIM mission of Japan, and also during the Odysseus mission of the United States, they also suffered some malfunction, and it's not a very full successful missions for these countries. So you can see how difficult it is to have a complete soft landing. You know that during history, the former Soviet Union conducted 27 soft landing attempt, but only 7 success. And for the United States, they have a Surveyor program. The Surveyor program have 7 attempts to soft land, but only 5 success.
And of course, this time it's different in the sense that we are landing, the Chang'e 6, the probe will be landing on the far side of the moon and be retrieving samples. And the landing part is always the most breathtaking part. What makes it more difficult than landing on the near side of the moon?
As we've already discussed, the terrain, the shape of the moon is completely different from the near side. Except for the mare called the Moscow mare, there do not have much flat areas on the far side of the moon. Moreover, there do have some small flat areas on the far side of the moon, but you cannot choose a place comfortable for you. You also need to consider about the meanings or the returns in scientific research. So to study the history of the moon, maybe the place we've chosen is not so flat and have very deep shapes on the descending trajectory. So we must consider these difficulties, and also, although we already have the soft landing on the Chang'e 4 mission, but still it is very challenging for us to conduct another soft landing on the far side of the moon.
Yeah, well, the moon has always been an object of wonder, and humans continue to be fascinated by the moon despite setting foot on its soil almost 60 years ago. CGTN's Wu Lei talks more about the significance of studying lunar soil samples.
You and I know what our planet Earth's soil looks like. It's composed of minerals, organic material, water, and microorganisms that allows plants and flowers to grow. But can these same plants and flowers thrive on the moon's soil? Lunar soil is a product of the weathering of moon surface rocks when they are hit by meteorites, cosmic rays, and solar wind. The huge temperature difference between day and night is also another factor for the rock's disintegration. There is no oxygen, water, or organisms that can make lunar soil fertile. Lunar soil does, however, contain minerals. The soil is composed of 5 basic parts: crystalline rock, mineral fragments, breccia, bonded agglomerates, and various silicates. Without any living elements, it's impossible to grow plants on the moon. As the only natural satellite orbiting our planet, the moon remains a familiar but mysterious body. And even if lunar soil isn't fertile like Earth's soil, many are wondering why scientists wish to study it.
So the discovery of ice in those lunar craters was certainly a milestone in our understanding of the moon. Did that cause a renewed interest in the moon?
Exactly. You see that as we've already discussed, the water not only can be drinkable by our astronauts, but also can be used to produce propellants, either to produce liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, or we can use carbon dioxide and water to produce methane, which is also a very ideal propellant. You know that why the moon is so unique. It is the closest celestial body to the Earth, and because of its low gravity, because of its vacuum condition, in the future we can even use electric power to accelerate the object from the lunar surface to orbit. So that you can imagine that will be much more cheaper than using a rocket. So that is reason if the exploitation can develop to a certain era, so maybe it is possible if we build something on the lunar surface and brought it to the outer space, that will be cheaper than produce that on the Earth and bring to outer space. Although it is more than 380,000 kilometers from the Earth, but according to the analysis of the scientists, it is very interesting. If we want to reach the geosynchronous stationary orbit, it is easier to start from the moon, not from the Earth. So you can see how what we call the moon economy stand. Because you know that many experts have already begun to study the future moon economy. Because you know that with the scale of human activities on the lunar surface become larger and larger, maybe in the future we can have more practical technologies to utilize the material on the lunar surface. So manufacturing on the lunar surface is also possible. So as we've already discussed, there are the regoliths, we can get the metals from these regoliths, the iron, titanium, and other metals. And also we can get other materials such, you know that the lunar soil is rich of oxygen. So it is easier for us but today, as you already asked, hydrogen is a critical thing. Right. So because you know that only if we can get hydrogen, can we get the methane or water or other things. So why the water is so important? Because although you know that the solar system has the richest element is hydrogen, but most of it, it's a pity that it is on the sun or in Jupiter, which we cannot use. So if we can find the hydrogen in the water form on the surface of moon, so that means that these resources together with the water on some asteroid will be very useful for Earth. Not to bring them back to the Earth, it's meaningless, but to have, as I mentioned, the on-site utilization.
Another big round of applause from scientists and engineers at the Ground Control Center. And we are still expecting another set of panels on the lander is being opened up.
From this 3D animation, we can see that the pair of solar panels on the lander has already been successfully unfolded.
Right, and this is certainly an important stage in the launch mission of the Chang'e 6. And we'll be waiting for some final official announcements.
Official announcements of whether it is a success.
So let's Go back to our earlier discussion, the discovery of water, this very valuable natural resource to support life and power our future space missions, was discovered by India's first lunar mission, the Chandrayaan-1.
Yeah.
There was this concrete evidence of the existence of water on Moon, and previously scientists believed that the Moon was barren land. And then they were convinced, they became confident that
exactly. So
there
that is the
water.
most important discovery of the Chandrayaan-1 mission conducted by my colleagues and friends from Israel. You know that today I work for the International Astronautical Federation Space Transportation Committee. Yes? Okay, we heard the voice from the Flight Control Center.
And if you've just joined us, this is our special coverage of China's lunar mission. The latest one is the Chang'e 6. It's a history-making mission, as it will be landing on the far side of the Moon and return with lunar samples. We are now more than an hour into the mission. Now there comes the official announcement.
Yes.
Officials, experts, and the comrades. According to the Long March 5 data and the data and report from Beijing Aerospace Control Center, the Chang'e 6 probe has accurately entered the preset orbit, and solar panel unfolded successfully and functioning well. Now I declare the launch mission a complete success.
Bravo.
Big congratulations to our scientists and engineers and people who've involved in this history-making mission. And as you said, Professor Yang, the screen really turned from blue to red, and that's a tradition from the Flight Control Center here on the Earth. No matter how far our spacecrafts travel or how important the mission is, it always comes to this final moment of the announcement of the success of the mission.
Of the whole mission. Well, yesterday I just sent a text message to Mr. Wu Weiren, the chief designer of the whole China's lunar exploration program, expressed my best wish to